Sometimes the most ordinary places hide the darkest secrets. What would you have done if you were in Emily's shoes? Would you have checked the dumpster or walked away thinking it was nothing? Let us know where you're watching from and if you've ever experienced something mysterious like this. If this story gave you chills, hit the like button and don't forget to subscribe. We have another incredible, spine tingling story coming tomorrow that you won't want to miss. Turn on notifications so you're the first to watch. A whisper from the dumpster and a truth more horrifying than she imagined. Emily took a deep breath, watching her 2.5-year-old son Lucas giggle as he munched on a cookie. His bright blue eyes sparkled with curiosity, his little hands gripping the snack as he sat by the living room window. Usually, Lucas was full of energy, always running around, but today, something was different. He wasn't looking at his toys. He wasn't focused on his cookie. Instead, his eyes were locked on something outside. Emily followed his gaze and saw the old, rusted dumpster sitting in front of the abandoned house across the street. The neighbors had moved out months ago, but the dumpster had been left behind, forgotten and weathered by time. It was nothing special, or so she thought. Lucas, what are you looking at? She asked, smiling as she ran her fingers through his soft brown curls. Lucas didn't answer. Instead, his small hand slowly lifted and pointed at the dumpster. His expression had changed. The usual excitement in his face was gone, replaced by something Emily had never seen before. Fear. Baby, there's nothing there, she said gently, trying to reassure him. But Lucas didn't blink. His lips trembled slightly before he whispered, Mommy. The man in the dark. A cold chill ran down Emily's spine. She turned quickly to look outside again, her heart pounding. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the yard, but there was nothing unusual. The dumpster was empty. No movement, no sign of anyone. She shook off the unease and turned back to Lucas. There's no one there, sweetie. It's just an old dumpster. But Lucas still looked scared. He shrank back against her, his little body pressing into her side. Emily frowned. He wasn't a timid child. He wasn't afraid of the dark or monsters under the bed. So why did he look so terrified now? Over the next few days, Lucas's fear only grew worse. Every time they walked past the dumpster, he would grab Emily's hand and pull away, his eyes wide with silent terror. Sometimes he would whimper or hide his face in her shoulder. Emily tried to brush it off. Kids get scared of silly things all the time, right? But deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Emily couldn't ignore it anymore. Lucas's fear wasn't fading. It was getting worse. Every time they stepped outside, his little body tensed, his grip on her hand tightening as soon as his eyes landed on the dumpster. He no longer just pointed at it. Now he would whimper and hide behind her, his tiny fingers digging into her clothes. One evening, as she was making dinner, she glanced toward the window and saw Lucas standing there again, staring. His small frame looked frozen in place, his shoulders stiff. Emily wiped her hands on a towel and walked over. Lucas, honey, what are you looking at? She asked softly. This time, he didn't just whisper. His voice trembled. The man in the dark, he's looking at me. Emily's breath caught in her throat. She turned sharply, her heart pounding, her stomach twisting as she stared out the window. The sun had already set, casting deep shadows across the street. The dumpster sat in its usual spot, its metal frame rusted and dented, but no one was there. Still, the way Lucas stood, his body frozen in fear, his eyes locked on something unseen, made her skin crawl. There's no man, baby, she whispered, kneeling beside him. You don't have to be scared. Lucas finally turned to her, his little hands reaching out, gripping her arms as if begging her to believe him. Mommy, he's hiding. A chill crept up Emily's spine. That night, she barely slept. Lucas's words kept replaying in her mind. He was just a toddler, too young to make up such detailed stories. Was it just his imagination? Or was there something she couldn't see? The next morning, she decided to ask her neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, a woman in her 70s who had lived on the block for decades. Have you noticed anything strange around here? Emily asked hesitantly. Mrs. Thompson gave her a curious look. Strange? How do you mean? Emily glanced toward the dumpster. I know it sounds silly, but Lucas keeps talking about a man in the dark. He says he sees him near the dumpster. At first, Mrs. Thompson chuckled. But then her smile faded. That dumpster. I've heard things about it, she said, lowering her voice. A few years back, before you moved in, there was an incident. Something bad. Emily's heart pounded as the old woman's eyes darkened. Someone went missing, Mrs. Thompson whispered, and they were never found. Emily's hands felt clammy as she gripped the kitchen counter. Someone went missing? Her mind raced with possibilities. Was it just an old rumor, or was there truth to it? That night, as she put Lucas to bed, he clung to her, his little fingers twisting into her shirt. "Mommy, don't go," he whispered. Emily kissed his forehead. "I'm not going anywhere, baby." But as soon as he drifted off, she found herself standing by the window again, staring at the dumpster. The street was quiet. The air felt heavier than usual, as if the neighborhood itself was holding its breath. Then, a sound. It was faint, but distinct. A soft scraping noise, like something moving inside the dumpster. Emily's pulse skyrocketed. It had to be an animal. A raccoon, a stray cat. Right? She grabbed a flashlight and took a shaky breath before stepping outside. The cold night air sent chills down her spine. The only sound was her own breathing as she moved toward the dumpster, each step slower than the last. Reaching it, she hesitated. The lid was slightly ajar, just enough to see a sliver of darkness inside. Her heart pounded as she grabbed the edge of the lid, pausing for a second before lifting it. A deafening bang, something, slammed inside the dumpster, making her jump back with a gasp. The lid rattled as if something or someone was trying to get out. Emily stumbled backward, nearly dropping the flashlight. What the? She forced herself to shine the light inside. Empty. But the moment the beam swept across the metal, she froze. Fingernail scratches. Thin, uneven, desperate. Her breath came in short gasps as she stepped away. She needed to leave, needed to grab Lucas and call someone. Just as she turned, a whisper echoed from inside the dumpster. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't an animal. It was a voice. "Help me." Emily's scream caught in her throat as she spun around, the flashlight shaking in her grip. But the dumpster was still, silent, as if it had never made a sound. She turned and ran, slamming the front door behind her, her entire body shaking. Lucas had been right all along. There was someone there. Emily's hands trembled as she locked the door behind her. Her chest heaved, her pulse hammering in her ears. She had heard it. That whisper, that plea for help. She pressed her back against the door, trying to steady her breath. Lucas was right. There was someone there. But who? And for how long? She wanted to believe it was just her mind playing tricks on her. The wind, maybe. An echo. But the scratches inside the dumpster told a different story. Someone had been inside. Trapped. She needed to do something. Her hands shook as she grabbed her phone and dialed 911. I think there's someone inside the dumpster near my house, she said, her voice unsteady. I heard them. They whispered for help. The dispatcher remained calm. "Ma'am, can you confirm if you saw someone inside?" Emily swallowed. "No, but I heard them." A pause. "Then we'll send an officer to check it out." She exhaled sharply, gripping the phone. She wasn't crazy. Someone would finally look into this. Minutes later, flashing red and blue lights illuminated the street. Lucas, now awake, peeked from behind the staircase. "Mommy?" Emily knelt beside him. "It's okay, sweetheart. The police are going to help." Lucas nodded, but his small hands clung to her sleeve. Outside, two officers approached the dumpster cautiously. Emily watched from the window, her breath held tight in her chest. One officer lifted the lid, flashlight in hand. For a moment, nothing. Then, a sharp gasp. Emily's stomach twisted as she saw the officers exchange a look before one of them reached inside. A few seconds later, he pulled out something frail, something barely moving. An elderly woman. Her skin was pale, her frail body barely covered by tattered clothes. She looked weak, her lips dry and cracked. She had been inside that dumpster for who knew how long. Emily covered her mouth, her eyes stinging with tears. The second officer called for paramedics. Within minutes, they lifted the woman onto a stretcher, an oxygen mask placed over her face. Emily could see her lips moving, barely a whisper. The officer who found her turned toward Emily's house, his face grim. Emily knew. This wasn't just some accident. Someone had put her there. Emily watched from the window, her hands pressed to her mouth as the paramedics loaded the frail woman into the ambulance. Her heart pounded in her chest. A mix of horror, relief, and disbelief. Someone had left her there. Someone had thrown her away. She barely noticed when one of the officers approached her door. A firm knock snapped her out of her daze. She swallowed hard before opening it. "Ma'am, I'm Officer Reynolds," he said, his expression serious but kind. "I need to ask you a few questions." Emily nodded and stepped aside, letting him in. Lucas peeked from the staircase again, his wide eyes darting between his mother and the officer. Emily gave him a small nod, silently telling him it was okay. "You were the one who called 911?" the officer asked, flipping open his notepad. "Yes," Emily said, her voice still unsteady. I heard her. Someone whispered for help." The officer raised an eyebrow. "You actually heard a voice?" Emily nodded quickly. "It was faint, but it was real." She hesitated before adding, "And the scratches inside the dumpster. It looked like she'd been trying to get out." Officer Reynolds exchanged a glance with his partner, who had just stepped inside. "Ma'am," the second officer said, lowering his voice. "The woman, her name is Margaret Porter. She's 82 years old. She was reported missing a week ago by a local shelter she used to visit." Emily's breath hitched. "A week?" "She's severely dehydrated and malnourished," Reynolds continued. "If you hadn't called tonight, she wouldn't have lasted another day." Emily felt sick. Someone had left an 82-year-old woman to die in a dumpster. "Do you know who did this?" she asked, gripping the edge of the couch. The officers exchanged another look. Then Reynolds sighed. "We don't have confirmation yet, but Margaret kept mumbling one name when we found her." He paused before saying it. "David." Emily's stomach twisted. She kept saying, "David did this. My son. My own son." A cold chill ran through Emily's body. Her own child had done this to her. She looked toward Lucas, who was clutching his teddy bear, watching them with innocent, curious eyes. Emily pulled him close, her mind racing. What kind of person abandons their own mother like that? She didn't know, but one thing was clear. Whoever David was, he needed to be found. This story is a chilling reminder that sometimes the most ordinary places hide the darkest secrets. What would you have done if you were in Emily's shoes? Would you have ignored Lucas's fear, thinking it was just a child's imagination? Or would you have investigated sooner? Let's talk about it in the comments. Have you ever experienced something eerie or unexplainable? Maybe a moment when your gut told you something was wrong, even when there was no logical explanation. And let's not forget the real question. How could someone abandon their own mother like that? What drives a person to such cruelty? We'd love to hear your thoughts. If this story gave you chills, hit the like button and let us know where you're watching from. Your support keeps us bringing you more incredible stories. And don't forget, we have another gripping story coming tomorrow. Make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss it. See you in the next one.